Just north of the Roxbury area and the Milton General Hospital is the Fairline Hill Estates. This is an apparently abandoned residential cul-de-sac. When you arrive, you find two yaoguai in the center of the town eating something. As soon as they see you, they attack. What's most interesting about this abandoned residential area is that almost every companion you have has something peculiar to say when you first arrive.
Where did everybody go? Used to be a small settlement here.
What a quaint little cul-de-sac. I wonder nobody seems to be home.
Awful quiet. Perfectly nice houses and no one living in them. That's not a good sign.
This doesn't look right.
Not right at all.
Seem a little too quiet to you out here?
Something's not right. Where are the people?
I don't like this. Something's not right here.
Where are the people?
Keep your safeties off.
Strange. People were living here the last time I came through. Now, nothing.
Wait, the last time he was here? So, is he saying that he's been here before? Why would X6 be here? He's a courser. Courses only come topside to run missions for the SRB. I brought every companion in the game here to see what they would say. The only ones who had nothing to say were Ada, Old Man Longfellow, and Porter Gage, the DLC companions. Strong has something to say, but he's the only other companion who doesn't say anything upon first reaching the town. So Preston Garvey said that this used to be a settlement, but the people are all gone. What went on here? Let's piece together the evidence to see if we can paint a fuller picture. In the middle of the town is the playground. This is where we found the yaoguai feasting on something. It turns out that they were feasting on Brahmin corpses. There are 2 Brahmin corpses nearby, and in the middle, we find a stack of skeletons. 2 full, completely bleached human skeletons. Are these pre-war skeletons, or could they have been the skeletons of the settlers that Preston Garvey mentioned? At the edge of the playground, we find a broken queen-size bed and a bookshelf. There's also a black couch on the sidewalk. Now, these typically are inside homes. How could they have gotten outside of the homes? Well, scavengers and wastelanders will typically use pre-war furniture to create some ramshackle buildings, defense fortifications. But none of these things are set up as shelters or defenses. They're just pieces of furniture laying out in the street. I suppose they could have been moved by some sort of blast, but what I think may be more likely is that the pre-war residents of Fairline Estates were moving quickly. Maybe they heard that the bombs were dropping, or maybe the bombs had just dropped, and instead of fleeing for a shelter, they were moving their furniture out of their homes before they succumbed to the radiation. There are 6 total homes in Fairline Estates. We will start from the left and go around until we explore each of them. House number 1 is the only red house in this cul-de-sac. We do not find much inside. On the ground floor, we find a cooler next to the refrigerator and a first aid kit in the holotape player in the living room. The most interesting thing we find is upstairs in the master bedroom. Beneath the master bed, we find a floor safe, but it's unlocked. This is rather unusual. I've never been to this settlement before. I did not unlock this. Why is this floor safe unlocked? And all of the loot is still inside. It's filled with ammunition and weapons. Who unlocked this floor safe and then failed to loot it? Out back in the backyard, we find nothing but a red doghouse. Moving on to home number 2, we find a van parked in the driveway. Perhaps this was an old Vault-Tec van. Maybe this resident was a former Vault-Tec salesman. And inside, we find a suitcase lying on the coffee table. This may be more evidence that the pre-war residents were planning a hasty exodus from Fairline Estates. But something happened, which is why this person left their suitcase behind. Upstairs, we find the master bedroom and combination nursery. Here, on the ground, we find 4 blocks. Now we know that Bethesda likes to spell things with these blocks. Typically they spell the word Gary, but in this case I looked at it from all different angles and I didn't see anything interesting. From one side it spells NFBI. From the other side it spells LCGZ. From the other side it spells DYVS. And from the top, before I moved to that P, it spelled APXU. None of these combinations of letters make any sense, and I don't think this has any significance. I think these are just set decorations. In the garage, we find a chemistry station. This means that either this pre-war resident ran an illegal chem trade, or that post-war, the settlers moved in here and were creating chems for their own personal use. Out back, we find a red swing hanging from a tree, and that's about it. House number 3 has a closed green door. Again, the inside has very little clues. We find a blue cooler on the kitchen counter, but in the living room we find a 10mm pistol lying on the coffee table with 2 10mm rounds standing upright. Why would the owner of this home go to the trouble of having a 10mm pistol, but leave without the pistol and leaving the rounds on top of the table? Perhaps they forgot it in their haste as they fled the home trying to escape the apocalypse. But I don't know, this is a lot lighter than a suitcase, a bookshelf, a couch, or a bed, all of which these homeowners dragged out into the street or set out to get ready to leave. The pistol is easy to just pop in a pocket. No, I think this might have some other explanation. Upstairs, we find very little, just a first aid kit on one of the shelves. House number 4 has a knocked-over mailbox and a rusting car in the carport. The first floor is pretty empty, except we find another unlocked floor safe, this one hiding under a side table. What is with all of these unlocked floor safes? This is extremely unusual. Safes are not uncommon. We find them all over the Commonwealth, but they are almost always locked. But in this one town, we find 2 very large floor safes, and both of them are not only unlocked, but unlooted. Upstairs, we find another suitcase lying out, hinting at some sort of hasty retreat. House number 5 has a white door that is left slightly ajar. On the first floor, we only find a cooler on top of the refrigerator, and on the second floor, we find yet a third suitcase lying out, with a nearby first aid kit on a shelf. The only interesting thing about this house is in the garage, we find a power armor repair station. What can we learn from this? Well, I can think of only one of 2 options. Either this home belonged to a serviceman, someone in the military, who maybe has a T-45 suit of power armor and had a repair station put in their garage because they used it all the time, or maybe they put it on display. Or this was placed here by a post-war scavenger who maybe repaired power armor as a service to make some caps. Typically, we only find these power armor stations around gunners who are known to use power armor, and sometimes around raiders who have their own raider power armor. I have a hard time explaining why this would be in a residential garage. Out back, we find the rear door gingerly leaning against the side of the house. This was likely placed here by scavengers or settlers who came to the Fairline Estates long after the bombs dropped and tried to turn it into a settlement. Probably the settlers whom Preston Garvey referenced. When we reach the 6th and final house, we get attacked by a glowing one.
Whoa, whoa. You hear that? I was just getting warmed up.
Now previously when I've done this encounter, I've found the glowing one in the house itself. So I think it must have been a glitch that this glowing one escaped from the house to attack me. The house itself is unique. It is the only one that appears to be fortified. We find tin can chimes on the porch, and the front door is chained shut. Your companions have something to say about this house.
Looks like someone's fortified this house. We should check it out.
Buddy, I'm guessing we won't find a welcome mat here.
Well, well. What do you think they're hiding in here?
I think the answers we're looking for are inside that house.
Strong find things to take.
This is the only time Strong has something to say in Fairline Estates.
It might be a good idea to be on the other side of those defenses.
Looks like someone's not interested in uninvited guests.
Silent neighborhood, a fortified homestead. This is how you start a good story. Or a horror novel.
Better in there than out here. Let's go.
Let's check out that house. But don't let your guard down. It's fortified for a reason.
Good place for a runaway synth to hide. We should look into it.
Wait, what? This would be a good place for a synth to hide? Why would this be a good place for a synth to hide? Just because the house is fortified? Since the front door is chained shut, we need to find an alternative entrance. Going to the back of the house, we find the rear door nailed shut with a board and blocked with furniture from the inside. There's also a booby trap here. If you allow this cymbal-clapping monkey to see you, it triggers the Tesla trap on the wall. So shoot the monkey so that you can disarm the Tesla trap. In the backyard, we find a cooking station and a chair. It's unlikely that the pre-war owners had this back here. They would have just used their stove. This, I think, is more evidence of the post-war settlers that Preston referenced. This must be one of the houses that they used. The only way into the house is to climb on top of the truck next to it. Here we find a conveniently placed dresser, which allows us to scale the house and enter through a hole in the wall. In this top room, we see a door that is chained shut. We hear shuffling on the other side, and we know exactly what we're going to find.
Better in there than out here. Let's go.
One feral ghoul dead on the ground, another one alive and attacking you, and I encountered the glowing one in this room as well, the past times that I've done this encounter. So 3 ghouls in one room. The windows are all boarded up, the bed is tipped on its end. Are these the ghouls of the pre-war owners or the ghouls of post-war settlers? To add even further confusion to this, going back down into the next bedroom, we find the steamer trunk that we find at the end of every major dungeon, a dirty mattress and a sleeping bag on the floor, and a bleached skeleton sprawled out on top of an explosives box. This man was well armed. We find a duffel bag filled with weapons and ammunition, a rifle leaning against the wall, a baseball bat leaning against the wall, an ammunition case filled with ammo, and a first aid kit. Downstairs, you can unchain the front door to trigger 2 leveled gun traps. Or you can disarm the tension trigger and both of the gun traps for the experience. There's little else on the bottom floor, just the stack of furniture against the rear door. So, now that we've explored the entire town and we've collected all of the evidence, let's try and piece this together into a story. What happened at the Fairline Estates? Well, the first thing that springs to mind is simple. We found 2 Yaogwai in the playground munching on Brahmin surrounded by skeletons. These Yaogwai must have come from the hills and devoured the entire town. Well, there's a problem with that theory. The first is that the Brahmin corpses are fresh. They haven't decomposed. The bears were in the process of eating them when we stumble upon them. And yet the skeletons lying in the playground are bleached. They are not wearing clothes, and they are bone white. Now, we do find bloody skeletons in the game. We find these bloody skeletons in areas where we know that these are post-war people that have been killed. Remember when we took a look at the West Roxbury Station, we found a bleeding skeleton hanging upside down over a toilet. This was a recent kill. This was a person who was killed recently, and his body was stripped of flesh by the super mutants. His skeleton still ran with blood. But these skeletons in the playground have been exposed to the elements for years. Daniel J. Westcott, the director of the Forensic Anthropology Center at Texas State University, says that the human body will fully decompose and turn into a skeleton between 3 and 4 months, if left out in the open. It's different when a body is buried underground or if a body is submerged in water, but when left exposed, it takes only between 3 and 4 months to become a skeleton. However, those skeletons have a different color. The bones of those skeletons still have absorbed blood. They're not quite as brittle. It takes many years of being bleached by the sun before they become bone white and brittle. I don't think that Yaogwai having killed the post-war settlers is a good enough explanation because the bodies would not have decomposed to quite the state that we find them in, while the very same Brahmin that they had been using for milk and fertilizer are just now being eaten. Additionally, the Yaogwai can't explain the skeleton at the top of the booby-trapped house. This skeleton looks almost as if he died to a gunshot wound. He's sprawled on his back, on top of a crate with a gun lying near to his hand. Almost as if he was leaning out the window shooting at someone, he got caught by a bullet, fell backwards, and landed on his explosives crate. There's no way the Yao Guai could have gotten in here to kill him. How did he get here? I think that there are two different stories being told in this scene. The first is the pre-war story. In 2077, the bombs drop. The residents of the Fairline Hill estates scramble to get their personal possessions together. They fill up their suitcases, they move out their prized pieces of furniture, until too late they realize the extent of the nuclear fallout. Their friends and neighbors begin to succumb to radiation poisoning and die in the streets. There, their bodies decompose and their bones become bleached by the weather and the sun. One man, instead of fleeing, decides to turn his home into a fortification. He chains the front door from the inside. He stacks up furniture against the rear door. And then climbing upstairs, he arms himself, ready to shoot looters who come to his home to steal his belongings. There, he and his family, we'll get to that in a minute, likely live for many weeks, who knows, maybe a month, until looters and raiders finally shoot him through a window, where he collapses backwards and dies. Now, what about the ghouls? Well, in the Fallout universe, people only become ghouls when exposed to extreme levels of radiation. We find them in places where there are large nuclear barrels, or we find them in locked rooms or otherwise unopened interiors that have been locked away since before the bombs dropped. I bet that upon the initial blast, the humans alive at that time either died in the blast or were dosed with so much radiation that they quickly became feral ghouls. After the first few weeks, the radiation had dissipated a bit, making it less lethal. We learned this from the story of the Turnquist family at the West Everett Estates. The father and his children hide in an underground bunker. There they stay for many months until they finally come topside to scavenge for resources. Their neighbors are still around, but those neighbors are turning into ghouls. He's held up at gunpoint by one of his neighbors whose face had begun to rot away. He was turning into a ghoul. But Mr. Turnquist himself was not turning into a ghoul because much of the radiation had already evaporated away by that time. It was certainly not safe, but it might not have been quite at the level of turning people quickly into feral ghouls. I bet what happened is that in the blast in this home, the man of the house armed himself and stood by the window to fend off looters, while the rest of his family, perhaps his wife and 2 children, stayed upstairs, soaking up radiation from this initial nuclear blast. The man of the house notices what's happening to his family. Maybe their minds are going faster than his, or maybe he's turning into a non-feral ghoul and his family is going feral before his eyes. Before they go completely mad, he locks them in the upstairs bedroom, chaining it from the other side. The chain was not there to keep people from getting in. No, the chain is on the outside of the door. It was there to keep whatever was inside from getting out. He locks up his family. He sets out a mattress and a sleeping bag by the window. Because he can't go back into the bedroom anymore, his family's there, so he sleeps just outside. Then he goes back to the window to protect his home and belongings. But before he can turn into a ghoul, he gets shot in the head by a raider or a looter. He falls backwards and dies. But the rest of his family is already rotting. The rest of his family is turning feral. And for the next 200 years, they stand in the top floor of this house, unmoving, waiting. Now, at some time, settlers arrive at the Fairline Hill estates and decide to move in. Preston tells us that this used to be a settlement. Preston is not an old man, he's a young man. He's only been a part of the Minutemen for years, not decades. And yet he remembers settlers living in this town. Perhaps it was the settlers who made the ramshackle ramp that led to the top floor of this fortified house. Here they discover the feral ghouls locked away in the room. How can you avoid them? They're making all sorts of noise. And so they back away, leaving all of the booby traps undisturbed, exactly as they were when the man put them up 200 years ago. With the ghouls locked away, they feel safe enough. They put a cooking stove out back, they bring their Brahmin. They start to occupy some of the other homes, setting up their coolers, putting food in their coolers. They find a back door that is still perfectly fine. They just set it against the house until they're able to repair it. But what happened to them? We don't find any fresh corpses. I think the answer might lie in what X688 says.
Strange. People were living here the last time I came through. Now, nothing.
The last time I came through. Why do coursers go above ground to run missions for the SRB? What is the SRB? The SRB is the Synth Retention Bureau. And what does X688 say when he reaches the fortified house?
Good place for a runaway synth to hide. We should look into it.
That this might be a good place for a synth to hide. Now, why would he say that? Maybe because he knows of a time where there was once a synth who tried to hide here? Could he be telling us that the settlers that settled here at the Fairline Hill estates had a synth with them? A synth whose mind was wiped by the railroad. A synth who might not have known that he was a synth. And a synth whom the SRB wanted back. Let me paint a picture. The settlers have finally found a place to call their own. Yeah, there are ghouls here, but they're safely locked away. The sun sets, they go to sleep, each in one of the houses that they've claimed for themselves. One man sits down at a couch in his living room and falls asleep loading his 10mm pistol. And then, X688 arrives with a group of synths. They quietly infiltrate the town, and instead of shooting everything up, instead of killing everyone, they incapacitate and kidnap the entire town. They unlock all of the safes in the town, maybe looking for holotapes from the railroad or possibly pre-war technology. But when they don't find anything interesting, they leave all of the worthless wastelander scrap. They bring the captured synth back to the SRB, where his mind is wiped and he is repurposed. And the rest of the settlers, well, they could have done anything they wanted with them. They could have donated these settlers to the FEV program. Virgil then turned them into super mutants. Or they could have made synth clones of all of these people, killed the originals, and sent the clones out into the Commonwealth as spies. Days go by, and the Brahmin that the settlers leave behind are hungry and thirsty. There is no one left to care for them. They begin to moo and cry out, attracting the attention of nearby wandering Yao Guai. The monsters descend upon the town, thrashing the Brahmin and devouring them in the playground. Until you come along, the sole survivor, and put an end to this story. I admit that I could be wrong. I admit that this is mere speculation. But I think that all of the evidence we find points to the Institute as the responsible party for the missing settlers at the Fairline Hill estates. But that is just one man's humble opinion. I would love to hear yours. Do you disagree with me, or do you think I've finally solved the riddle? Let me know in the comments section below. I read all of your comments, and I would love to hear your opinion on this topic. I release a new video like this every single day, so be sure to subscribe to find out what I publish tomorrow. And if you'd like to chat about this topic with other like-minded individuals on the Oxhorn Community Discord server, be sure to click on that Discord invitation link in the description below. And if you like what I do and you want to support me in a more personal way, consider becoming one of my patrons on Patreon. Patreon subscribers gain access to a private channel on our Discord server, as well as a bunch of other cool Oxhorn perks. But more than anything, ladies and gentlemen, I'm just so glad that you're here watching this video with me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you bright and early tomorrow morning with a brand new video.